I don't know if this quote is entirely true since I got it from a site that posted it on April 1st, but it said what I wanted it to say, so I used my confirmation bias and picked it. Software is hard, it's very complicated, and it doesn't just occur naturally. You need a team together, multiple people, sometimes distributed, working together to make it. Our part of the team as testers makes it hard to develop relationships with developers who are actually producing the software. There's a lot of conflicting priorities. There are some egos, like mine, missteps that people make. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about building that relationship by using credibility as a metaphor, as a credibility wager. So I want you to think every time you interact on your team with a developer, and that's not just like filing a bug report, but every time you ask a question, every time you file a bug report, every time you make a statement, you're wagering some of your credibility in the hopes that the developer will find that question, bug, statement valuable to their work in some way, in which case you get a little bit more. Now, your credibility starts out as a tiny pile of credibility, like when you sit down at the table at the poker place, right? Most of that is based on the testers that they have worked with before. In my experience, that is a very small pile. Okay, so you don't have much credibility to start with. Now, when you say something, when you file a bug or ask a question, you can tell that you don't have the credibility to make that wager when they just ignore you. I was in an agile planning meeting once. This team had just been assembled earlier that morning. We had never really worked with each other before. So we had like a kickoff type thing, and then we were in this planning meeting, and we were estimating stories, and we came up against one that I felt was like moderately difficult, and I rated it as a 5, and one of the manager types said, if that's a 5, then we won't finish this project on time. Now, at this point in my career, I was savvy enough not to just say, duh, that's what I told you an hour ago. I said something like, okay, well, I can use this as a basis for a 3, but that doesn't make the project any smaller if I just make all of these 3s. I was taken off the project by the time it ended, and it ran over, and he was the only one that was surprised by that, I think. But it was an example of I didn't have the credibility with this person to make the statement that this story was a 5, to make the statement that we don't have enough time to accomplish this project's goals. And so he ignored me, he brushed me off. Right? So I want to build my credibility over time. One of the easiest things that you can do to do that, one of the things that Dale Carnegie talks a lot about in his books that are sort of seminal on influence, are learning people's names. I'm terrible at this, okay? One of the reasons I'm always wearing my conference badge, even when I'm talking. You may notice people who have seen me previously or who are here physically will notice that I have a previous year's on my back. That's because I'm so bad at remembering people's names, I don't expect them to be able to remember my name. So if they want to get my attention and they happen to be behind me instead of in front of me, I want them to be able to say, hey Curtis, and not hey Jesse, or hey you, or something. So it's something that I work on, but I'm not very good at. When I'm working with a new team, and I get pulled into a new project with a bunch of people I haven't worked with before. Usually they're people I've seen in the hallway and said hi to, but I don't remember their names. I try to find out their names, or at least their possible names, before I go into those meetings. I do that by looking on the social networks inside my workplace, your Yammers, your Honeys, whatever your company happens to use. Most companies, I think, today have like an internal social network type thing. Many of them also include like a small photo in their HR system that you can go and look up people's titles and their names and a small photo, so you can sort of associate, or at least like narrow down the field of possible names and get that. Some email systems will also include a name, or you can take their email and put it into Gravatar in case they have a photo there, something like that. You also want to make sure that you're pronouncing their names correctly. People's names are the most important names to them. I had a Chinese team member on one of my teams a while ago whose name I regularly mispronounced. I probably did it in front of him and he didn't correct me. And I probably did it several times in public before my manager at the time pulled me aside and said, "Do you mean," and said the name correctly. And then I was like, "Oh, how long have I been mispronouncing that?" Oops. We work with a lot of people from exotic locations. They're not exotic to them, though, right? We work with a lot of people from Asia, Southeast Asia, Europe, a lot of Europeans at the conference. And it's really important to get people's names correct. So the way I've sort of structured my talk is I'm going to show you some of the principles that I've learned about for the talk. Most of these things I have stories for that I've been doing over the years, and I just didn't realize that I was doing them. In-group bias is one of them. And that means if you're in somebody's same group, like the group of testers, you're more likely to help somebody out if they're in your group. So you're more likely to help out a tester than you are a developer. You're more likely to help out a member of the AST than you are a strange tester. You're more likely to help somebody on your team than you are somebody who's on another team. So you got to try to get onto the developer's team mentally. Like, I'm not talking about organizationally. There's not a lot you can do to control that, but you can get them thinking, oh, this person thinks like I do. This person has the same concerns as I do. How do you do that? Small talk is how I sort of do it. So I realized over the years that you can sort of direct small talk in a way that guides people to common interests, which is sort of the basis of friendship, I think. So I don't really garden, but my developers do. So I pull out pictures of my lawn and say, look at all this ivy, these invasive plant species. They're terrible. I have to spend all weekend ripping them up. What's that about? And I move a little closer to being in their group. You won't always have commonalities between all of your developers. My hobbies are like game playing and tabletop RPGs, which are pretty common in technology, but not everybody. Most developers also have like a really weird hobby that you can ask about and just keep asking more questions. So it came up in the course of this sort of small talk one time that one of my developers he collected Tom and Jerry cartoons. What? That's not a thing that you collect. Why do you do that? Can't you just buy a DVD? Apparently not. Apparently, where they touch on sensitive subjects like the World Trade Center, there are episodes that just aren't available for purchase anymore. So this developer collects them from the internet and various, I guess there are probably message boards for people who collect Tom and Jerry cartoons and know where to get that sort of thing. Your developers probably have a really weird hobby too. They're not just all into drinking or gardening or something. There's probably something that you could dig deeper into, and they like talking about themselves and their hobbies, I promise. You can also, so your job as a tester is to critically evaluate the developer's work, right? But you're probably not the only person evaluating their work, okay? They have managers who are doing performance evaluations. They have peers who are doing code reviews or something like that. They have customers. If you can speak for the other people who are evaluating their work, they'll value your input much more. And if you can say, hey, I noticed that you did this thing and your boss hates that. If he sees it, you're going to be screwed. Now I'm on his team. Okay? The other thing you can do to sort of get on their team is to develop a common enemy. So in the picture, everybody in that boat is on the same team, and the common enemy is the water. If they don't work together, the water's going to kill them. Right? Most of the time, I do this with snarky comments. So I'll identify somebody who is causing me pain. If they're causing me pain, they're probably also causing the developer pain. Hey, so I know you've got all this work already, but how about if we do all of the features for the next release without expanding the memory profile of the application at all? Sure, that's totally possible. Like, and would you like that early too? I might say to the developer in Slack or at the watering cooler or something like that. Now, the person who's requested that is the enemy, both of our enemies, and we're on the same team now. Okay? Another principle, the rule of reciprocity. This is why, so I don't know if this happens in other locations, but in the United States, every now and then you'll get mail from a charity that has a nickel or a quarter in it or something, and it says, you can keep this quarter or you can return it with a $5 monthly promise to donate to our organization. And that's powerful because they've already given you something, and the social pressure is to return the favor. Okay? If the favor is significant to the developers, they'll have an unconscious pressure to return the favor to you somehow. So you can get bugs fixed that wouldn't necessarily be fixed. You can get more information from them. Sky's the limit. How do you exercise this rule? You got to know how they're evaluated. What is important to these developers in terms of their motivation, right? In a workplace, a lot of times that equates to money, and that equates to like an annual performance review or something. If you can save their annual performance review some bad bugs, they'll owe you one, and you can cash that in later. And if they owe you one, they'll also feel like an unconscious desire. If they're doing you favors too, they'll feel an unconscious, they'll change their mental model to like you more to justify their actions, right? Another way you can do it in a more sort of tactical way is to bend the rules a little bit, right? So I've been in situations where the developer's primary goal is to ship new features, right? That's what they're evaluated on chiefly, the number of features that they can get into a release. But they're not allowed to work on the features if there are a certain number of bugs in the system. If I sit on a bug for a couple of days, it could be enormously valuable to them, right? They know, I could go and say, hey, Bob, I found a couple of bugs in your feature, but I noticed that you're close to your bug cap. Are you busy right now? Are you in the zone working on something? Yes. Okay. Well, none of these are super important, so I'll wait a few days before I put them in. That's incredibly valuable to Bob. It's a little evil too. Okay. You're bending the rules, you're gaming the system. Most of the metrics that developers are measured against, just like most of the metrics that we're measured against, can be gamed. If you game it in their favor, they'll appreciate you more. You'll win a lot more credibility. And the next time you have to work with them, they'll owe you one. You'll be perceived as a higher value team member. Another thing that motivates the developers is mastery. Okay, Dan Pink defines mastery as a desire to get better at something that matters. Figure out what matters to your developers. Okay, a lot of times that's something like elegance. Some of them just want 0 bugs in their code. But a lot of them have a special passion for a particular kind of non-functional requirement or ILD or something. I had a developer who was kind of obsessed with coloring. He ran a virtual machine that used a virtualization technology that was significantly slower than what everybody else on the team was running. Okay? And he did that because everybody else was running something that only had a 4 megabyte video card and could not do millions of colors. Whereas what he was running had a 32-bit video card and could handle the millions of color setting in Windows. So he put up with incredible pain to get this as his test environment. And he did that because he was so obsessed with the gradient on his feature that he was unhappy with the virtualization technology that most of us used, and was relatively painless to spin things up and down and fairly fast to operate the software that we were working on. Now this was a visualization feature, but it was a graph, right? It was a graph designed to be consumed by developers. A solid line would have been just as good. In fact, he left the company before we shipped the feature, and we changed it to a solid line because the gradient was kind of hard to follow on the graph when it scaled up to some of our customers' demands, right? But it identified for me the amount of pain that he was willing to go through in order to get the gradient just right. Let me know. This guy really cares about colors. So the next time I found a bug that had to do with colors, it wasn't in his area, but I told him about it anyway. He went and fixed it because it was something that he cared about. The next time after that, it wasn't in an area that he really could control. But he was a senior developer on the team. He put pressure on the other developers to fix their bug, right? And it wasn't me putting pressure on those developers. I don't have that kind of credibility, not on that team. But he was a senior developer. He was already in their group. He put the pressure on them. They changed it. They fixed their gradient to be prettier. Wasn't a big bug, but it got fixed, right? And not only did it get fixed, but now I have even more credibility with my developer because I'm bringing him things that he cares about. So I'm making small bets and winning big. Think about that. A lot of developers also like solving puzzles. A lot of them, that's the reason why they got into programming. If you can bring them a juicy puzzle, they'll love you, right? If you can cause a divide by zero error in a program that doesn't do math, they want that bug. If you get a deadlock in a program that's single-threaded, or at least they think it is, somebody's going to spend a while looking at that. And a reputation as somebody that can make impossible things happen is not a bad thing for a tester. One of my developers, after a while, started calling me a super tester and offered to, he's always like, "Where's your cape?" Right? That was a high credibility relationship that I had with that developer. I never got the cape, unfortunately. I was kind of hoping when I left that company that he would show up on the last day and here's a cape so that the next developers know. I had to start over from a tiny pile of credibility again when I moved to my next job, but I learned a lot about how to make that pile grow fast. Right? And hopefully you all are learning a lot about that now. So if you can bring them puzzles, they like that. Peer pressure. It's not just for smoking anymore. Okay? It's incredibly powerful. Sometimes even my techniques don't always work, right? I've been doing it for a while. I've been doing it consciously for a little while. But it doesn't always work. Sometimes I don't know the developers well enough. Sometimes, they're just really hard. The people they worked with before are not very good testers, didn't bring them anything valuable. They're not interested in working with me really at all. They'll fix the bugs that the project manager says they have to fix if I put them in the system, but they don't want to talk to me. But if I win over all the other developers, and all of the other developers are hanging out at my desk, high-fiving me, man, what am I missing out on? All of the other developers are hanging out with Curtis, and I'm on the out group. I don't want to be on the out group. I want to hang out with Curtis. Early on in my career, I was lucky to have a great developer that I was working directly with. Unfortunately, there was one developer, one tester for a certain part of the application, another developer and another tester for another part of the application. Really good ratio. You don't see that much. The other tester was not very good at his job. The other developer was a bear to work with. Every now and then I would find something in his area and he'd put up the wall, right? But the developer that I worked with directly, he was cool, right? Like, our personalities just naturally clicked. This is before I was like practiced at doing what I'm talking about today, at making a common enemy, figuring out what the developer's motivations are. But it just happened that serendipity, I got paired with a developer whose personality matched my own, and we got along really well. So I wasn't really concerned about the other developer who was a bear to work with, right? Because I'm not really responsible for his stuff, so, we'll muddle through. But I did have a really good relationship with my developer. And when the time came to push out I think it was our third public release, the other developer had been burned several times by serious bugs getting released into the wild to the public. It wasn't, they were like beta releases. But this new release coming up was getting up towards like the final release. It was like a release candidate, we would say. He came to me, asked me to do some smoke testing on his stuff, in addition to what I was doing for mine. Part of that was social proof. He could see that my developer wasn't having these problems. You look around, maybe it's because he's working with Curtis. So at this point, there are a lot of resources that I use to pull quotes from, understand the concepts of the sort of psychology that I was using subconsciously at the beginning and slowly began to recognize. But so there are a lot of books up here, a couple of papers. Most of them are very accessible. They're sort of pop sci stuff. And there's a few sort of classic manipulation strategy things in there that I didn't use directly in my talk, but they've influenced me so much that I can't really leave them out of a bibliography on this topic, like Machiavelli and The Art of Strategy, which most people know as The Art of War, but in this translation it's translated, I think, a little more accurately as strategy. So with that, Carol, if you can go to, yeah. People in the back, if you could help Carol by moving forward, if you want to take part in the conversation, that would be great.
Okay. So I've got 97. I've got 124. Anyone who wants to add? I'll start with 97.
So, hi.
Hey.
That's hard. I was wondering, is there anything that I can do if I'm in a situation where I have feedback that I think is important, but I don't yet have that credibility to push it through? Is projecting maybe confidence could be a good substitute for that? Or is there anything else I can do in the really fast rate if I don't have enough allies, if I don't have that sort of credibility?
That's tough when you're just starting out. You might not win that battle. Probably what Matt's been talking about all week about frame control might help you. I'm not really qualified to talk about that. I think he's talked to you a little bit about it. I might start there. I might look for other allies, like I guess you're new on this team or company. No, yeah, okay. In that case, I would take a different track. You think this is important, you think somebody cares about it. Yeah. Find those people, tell them about it. It might damage your credibility a little bit going around the developers, which is kind of the point of my talk, but if the bug is really important to you, then like sometimes you have to sacrifice credibility in order to, it's a currency, right? I used poker chips on purpose. You wager it and you get some more, hopefully when you win, but sometimes you have to spend it too.
Now we've got 124 on the same topic.
Hello. Just to say, Curtis, despite your 2 name badges, I've referred to you as Curtis Pettit to at least one person this week.
That's fine, that's common.
Yeah. So on the subject of credibility wagers, I once worked within a team where I held very high credibility within the testing team, but everyone else's credibility in the testing team was rock bottom.
Right.
Now, that was great for developers because they had their go-to guy who they went to if they really wanted something to happen in the testing department, which was me. Obviously, it was bad for me because I've got a lot of stuff coming my way, not a lot of stuff willing to be diverted elsewhere. And I'm just wondering whether there's anything I could do as someone with high credibility within a team to actually spread that credibility within the team, and whether I'm putting my own credibility at risk if I'm gambling against my teammates.
Yes, you're putting your own credibility at risk. I take it you're a senior person on the team, or
This is a previous team, but yes, I was, yeah.
a senior? Okay. I think part of your responsibility as a senior person is to help grow the team. If they would be responsive to taking like mentorship and stuff, then you can mentor them on how to gain more credibility, how to work with the developers better. If they're not responsive to that, I mean, you're not going to be able to force them to have high credibility. You can't force, just like you can't force somebody to be good. What you can do is sort of be an evangelist for their goodness to the developers. So if your team brings you a bug that they think is important, but they don't have the credibility to bring that to the developers, you go, you make the bet, and you give them the winnings. You say, he found this bug, right? Maybe you bring them with you to when you go talk to the developers, or CC him on the email or Slack chat or HIP chat, or whatever your company uses, and just sort of evangelize the fact that while you're good and a high credibility, high value team member, it's a team, right? Everybody on the team contributes something.
So we've got 149 on the same topic.
Yes, to chain off of the question of if you have no credibility or very low credibility, how do you get that issue addressed? I've been in this situation several times. When possible, I've always tried to elevate to my test lead or whatever to say, here's the issue, here's why I believe this needs to be pushed. Will you back me? Will you, and ultimately it's going to be their decision in most cases on whether it's a fight that they're going to fight. The more information you have, the more data, the more evidence you have to support your theory. When you go in, the stronger your position is going to be. It is going to be a gamble. You absolutely are going to have to take chances at times. It's going to be one of those, putting all of your poker chips on the table, to use your analogy. You just have to make that step. And sometimes it pays off immensely because you found that one thing that didn't seem consequential at all, and it turned into something that was very consequential to the product, or something that somebody had completely overlooked. But a lot of times it's just learning to work within the system to elevate the problem in a way that gets it noticed, or that you can explain yourself, but always make sure you really have the evidence to back it up. If you go in half-cocked and you gamble and you lose, it as pointed out, your currency diminishes incredibly. But if you hedge your bet by making sure that you It's like any bet where you hedge it as much as you can, but you're still always going to be gambling. But just take that opportunity, take that chance, because if you pull back and don't do it, and it does become a big thing, then that's almost a more disastrous, unrecoverable position to come back from.
Yeah, it's a battle sometimes. That's why I included the art of strategy in my bibliography. Know thyself, know thy enemy,
Same topic?
and you will win 100 battles. You will win 100 battles in 100 battles. And you have to pick your battles. The greatest general isn't the one who fights a hard battle and wins, right? The best generals are the ones who've already won by the time they've led their troops onto the field. It's already decided that they're going to win. Pick your battles. If you can't win this one, maybe it's not worth it to spend all of your credibility to get this one bug fixed. You might need that for another one. Depends on how important that bug is.
Anyone else on the same topic?
Yeah. I wanted to touch the point of trying to brush some of my credibility off to other team members. One thing that I've been doing lately is just directing the questions that come to me to other team members. Like a developer would come and, can you help me with this and this and this? Or can you help me reproduce the bug? And I would just say, well, I'm not the expert in the room, just go and ask over that table. And that actually builds credibility for that person. So next time they will be that go-to person and they will have that. So, you could have tried that or might have tried that in the future.
Right, depending on the different levels of credibility, you might just want to call that person over and have the developer watch them solve that problem for them, right? Instead of just brushing the developer off, go talk to Amit. I could say, Amit, come here. Developer has a problem. I know you can fix this.
Is that all for the same topic? Then we're going to go to new topic 124.
Okay, last one from me. So we were in a track session yesterday with Anne-Marie, who was giving a really interesting talk on the subject of trust, what it means to have and earn trust. And one of the properties of trust that came up was the subject of credibility, and whether credibility is an element of trust or whether the two are synonymous. And what I found through your talk was that some of the tips, the dark arts you were showing, were a very good way to gain credibility within a team, but not necessarily to gain trust. If you become known as the guy who will only bitch about other people or have these underhand ways to make things happen, do you think trust and credibility are one and the same? And do you think trust is fostered in any different way?
That's hard to answer. I wasn't in Anne-Marie's track session yesterday. So, do I think they're the same thing? Not exactly. Credibility is more about how true do I think what this person is saying is. How true do I think, how much value will that have for me? Will that be a positive value if I act on that? Whereas trust is more about without evidence. Would I do the same thing without evidence? Now, it's a fine line to walk between being like the common enemy thing. The people I'm setting up as enemies, they have their own jobs and their own priorities and responsibilities, and they're trying to do the best they can with those priorities, and sometimes they conflict, and that's an unfortunate result of the way software is developed, especially when there's money involved. I usually do it in private, person to person. I don't, and I try not to attack people, at least until I know who the developers are close with, because I don't want to accidentally attack their friend. I'll attack the ideas, the deadlines, the budgets, the constraints. Those are the enemy. The PM or the other team or the dependency, they're just the messenger. I don't always tilt it like that because I'm evil, but you certainly could, being such a stand-up guy.
So on the same topic, we have 8.
So on the topic of trust and credibility, I was wondering if you could share a specific example of a case where someone's kind of seen through the facade. So like when you go to a magic show and you realize that the magician is tricking you, and then you suddenly, every trick from then, you're trying to work out what trick he's doing. And so there's a risk with this, right? That people are like, oh, you don't actually care about my garden. You're just trying to play me. And then
Especially
they
since this
try
is
and
being
spot
broadcast.
this. Yeah, absolutely. But I wondered if you had an example from your history where someone's kind of picked up on your evil tendency and then that's been really hard to recover from.
A specific example. I mean, I'll let Claire talk in a minute, but so the developers that I work with know that I'm here talking about manipulating developers. Part of why I went to look into the psychology of what I was going to talk about is that they can't really help how their brains are wired, right? If I do them a favor, even if they know I did it to get something back from them, I know when that nickel comes in the mail that they want money out of me. But I'm still under pressure to give something back to them. It might not be, if they're aware of it, it might not be as powerful, but there's still some power there. And my developers, they recognize that I have a job to do too, and that my job is to critique them. What I'm trying to get to with the team building aspect of it is for them to realize that my goal isn't to find bugs, to delay the software. It's to make them look good. We have to ship this software. If it's buggy, they won't look good. If it works great, they'll work great, and I'll sort of be invisible. So I think they recognize that, and even if they know that sometimes I'm being a little manipulative, I also try to do it funnily, so with my snarky comments. And I'll direct more to the people who laugh more at me.
Are you really on the stack?
So Curtis totally manipulated me coming here. He said, hey, we're both going to cast, and I don't know where to stay, and it would be fun if we had like a group place to stay, and wouldn't you enjoy that extrovert person who likes to have people around? And you know, you could find us a place and then it would be easier. And then I said, oh, hey, I can do this too. So I said, hey, Matt, wouldn't you like to have an Exelon house to host events and build your brand? And so sometimes seeing through the facade actually can be a positive thing.
Thanks, Claire. I have nothing to add to that.
And so now we have one new topic, and then after that we have a Twitter topic.
So one thing along the lines of, you know, the giving the nickel that I found that works really well is out and out bribery. So either you figure out what somebody likes to eat, or you make it. Maybe you make really good chocolate chip cookies. Somebody on my current team loves anything flavored mint. So I brought in some cookies that I could also eat, because in case people didn't like them, then at least they wouldn't be wasted. But I brought in a box of cookies, and it was amazing how much nicer everybody was to me. And I've noticed that bringing occasional bribery really improves, not necessarily it doesn't go straight into credibility, but it certainly improves the communication, which allows you to then improve your credibility.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because that lets me talk about two stories. One of them, I was talking with my lovely facilitator, Carol, about her talk and about why buying donuts didn't work for her. And I'm like, buy donuts. How did I leave that out of my talk? It's so obvious. Who doesn't like donuts? So, well, you're weird then.
They're very health conscious in Oregon, okay?
Right. Organic, gluten-free donuts.
But that actually does lead to the next session, is knowing what your team likes. And you don't have to bring donuts. You don't have to bring cookies. You could figure out how to make, so one of the things, for a really long time, I couldn't do sugar, I can't do gluten. So I actually make a healthy dessert that's baked apple crisp. Sweetened with honey, so it's like all health conscious, but the people who actually still like the donuts don't find anything wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
So finding out what they like will aid that quite a bit, because just bringing straight donuts doesn't always work.
Yeah. It reminds me that Dawn Hayes, just last night, was telling me a story about how she explicitly used the rule of reciprocity with Friday donuts. She had a developer who was particularly difficult, had a reputation for yelling and screaming and just being sort of violent, not physically that she mentioned, but hard to work with at least. So she brought in donuts every Friday, and for every donut that this developer took, she got a check mark on her board. And that check mark allowed her the following week to go and ask him a question that he had to answer without screaming. He had to, because donut, and it was last week. So he can't, he don't have the donut anymore. He can't just give it back and scream. And it's a donut, so on a Friday you can't really control yourself. You've got to take at least a couple. So she always has a couple of check marks to use.
So we've actually got 3 questions from Twitter from the same user, so I'm not sure if we'll get to all of them because we've got about 10 minutes.
Thank you, Twitter.
Yeah. So this is from WB Micah Wimmer, which I assume I'm parsing that correctly. The first one is, how important is personality in influencing your developer? What if you're shy and dry and awkward?
It's really important. You can use it to your advantage, like that developer story I told earlier, where before I was consciously trying to be friends with developers, we just kind of clicked, and it just happened naturally, which sort of let me see how my relationship was different with other developers when I started working with a broader team, and it wasn't all like that. So it's important. I think with the psychological principles, if you're thinking about things in terms of credibility, you can build that relationship slowly over time, no matter if there's a personality conflict or not. Like Dawn's story, she found a way to divert the personality conflict and was able to build an important relationship with that developer. She said she was the only one who could work with that developer, and I believe she included the dev team in that only one. So if you're doing it on purpose, you can make it happen for almost anybody.
Okay, I don't have cards because I'm the facilitator, but I kind of want to adjust that. Because specifically they were addressing shy and dry and awkward, and I know that feeling very deeply because I am indeed shy. Maybe not always dry, I'm pretty sweaty right now, but I'm definitely awkward. And for me, what's really important is that, yes, you can all use all of these tactics, and for me, the thing that works best is finding one person to make a connection with. You don't have to make them all at once, just one person, and let that one person advocate for you, and then that will open the door to making the rest of the relationships work.
Perfect social proof.
Second question, also from Micah Wimmer. Is an ethical line being crossed when utilizing any of your social engineering ideas? And he called it social engineering.
Yeah, he does. Probably. Which ethical construct are you using when you ask me if I'm crossing a line? And I think I'm a force for greater good, which is more of a moral argument than an ethical argument, but without knowing, like, we're using Kantianism as our ethical construct, or utilitarianism, or a professional code of ethics. It's really hard to answer that question, especially since it's been a long time since I've read the AST Code of Ethics.
All right, so on the same topic, I have 97.
Well, you mentioned before that in a specific case you went and gamed the metrics.
Yes, sir.
Not
just one.
To what extent are you comfortable in doing that? Because metrics are there for some reason, and if you game them too much, you're actually lying to your employer. So I would say that might be the line where an ethic boundary can be crossed. Can you identify such cases and say, here I was very close, or here I blew the line by far?
Right. So, again, it depends on, if we're talking about ethics, I could say, in utilitarianism, I believe I'm producing more value by helping this developer building this relationship for the future than I am taking away by possibly lying. Therefore, it is ethical. How much do I game the system? It depends a lot on the context. So if there's a show-stopping bug, like something that's hurting people, not at all. If it's something that's in live software that could be affecting customers right now, and we have a mechanism to fix it and get it out quickly, that could be more important than saving the developer a context switch or even a review or something. If it's software that's not released yet, what's the harm in sitting on bugs for a few days or just not entering bugs that I know we're not going to fix, right? I think everybody sort of makes those decisions, if not consciously, then at least subconsciously, about what you choose to test.
Okay, so we're going to go to 124, same topic, then 83, same topic, then we'll see if we get to the third question.
Just to add one final comment and to add another word into the mix when we're considering ethics, I think the one to add here is integrity, which is the reasons why you're doing this. You're trying to foster team relationships, you're trying to build a better team, despite your dark arts. I think if you were trying to use these same techniques to trick your developers out of money, we would question your integrity. If you were trying to make them look stupid, we would question your integrity. But I think, yes, you're right, it's highly contextual. And the comment from the thread was, yeah, this is contextual. But you're doing it with integrity in mind.
Yeah, it does say evil in my slides, in my abstract, right? So you be the judge.
So we're going to 83 on the same topic?
I was just going to just follow up on the issue of metrics and influencing metrics, and just to keep in mind that, humans will subconsciously, manipulate metrics such that they favor them, and, that which can be measured can be manipulated. And so you just always have to need to keep that in mind, both when you're establishing metrics and when you're looking at working with them.
Yeah. You can't measure something without changing it. That's like a fundamental principle of measurement. Heisenberg, I think. Micah would know. And I'm not really here to talk about which metrics are good or which metrics are bad. That's a different talk. So I'm just the metrics that are in place can be gamed, hopefully for the greater good, or in my case, evil.
Ready for the final question from Micah here? We've got, how do you handle a situation when your techniques aren't being received well? How much do you push?
You can't win over everybody. If I take it as my goal to help the developers to get this software, to make them look good, most of them will come around over time. It took that developer, that bear of a developer, more than a year of working sort of next to me to come around and respect what I do as a tester. That won't happen for everybody. But if what we do is make them look good, if we can do it better by working with them, over time, the developers that work back with us will float to the top of the organization. And when it comes time to lay off or fire somebody, it's going to be the person or people who are not working with you that get the axe. Over time, natural selection will tell.
Okay, that's all the ones we have on the stack. That's everything we got from Twitter, so I think we're all set.